Good afternoon. Welcome to the second day of the Language of Empowerment seminar. Today we have Dr. Katarzyna Bronk-Bacon as our speaker. Dr. Katarzyna Bronk-Bacon is an assistant professor in the Department of English Literature and Literary Linguistics at our faculty. Some of you might already know Dr. Bronk-Bacon as an expert on monsters and monstrosity in literature and culture, as well as a teacher of history of British literature classes in the first year of our studies. Dr. Bronk has published on literary and paraliterary codes and books of conduct, rules of propriety and non-normativity in theatre and drama, all of which inevitably led through various intersectionalities, age being the least explored. Dr. Bronk-Bacon's current and ongoing research is devoted to old age and aging as defined and represented in English culture and literature, especially in the long 18th century. Her publications include two edited collections, Autumnal Faces, Old Age in British and Irish Dramatic Narratives from 2017, and Experienced Age Knows What for Youth is Fit, ? Generational and Familial Conflict in British and Irish Drama and Theatre from 2019. And a monograph, And Yet I Remember, Aging and Older Age in English Drama between 1660 and the 1750s from 2019 as well, which concluded her research grant from the National Science Center in Poland. So let's welcome our speaker.
Okay, I do apologize for my voice. I tried my best, but well, this is as good as it gets. Okay. When I was first asked to participate in this conference, I felt a bit anxious because of the subject matter of this conference. After all, this is supposed to be about empowerment via language or not, but empowerment. And of course, when we think about old age, empowerment is perhaps not the first thing that comes to our mind. Enfeeblement, deterioration, decay, conclusion, end, death, right? These are the words that feature in the discourse on old age, or more poetically, senescence. And this is no matter whether you study the past or whether you focus on 2022, because even if we veil it in the language of the so-called successful aging, it's still going against everything I just said, right? So the essence is still the same, no matter how positivist or positive we want to make it. But my anxiety concerning the topic was exactly because of that, because I thought that I am to make old age empowering in itself. And I've just suggested that it's full of ifs and buts, and it's too limited and too conditional, and you probably wouldn't believe me. So I finally felt I belonged when I looked deeper into the discipline that we call, the discipline or the orientation that we call humanities. Because when you look at the many definitions, they all kind of suggest the same thing, that humanities were created to resist denigration, that it was to allow people to talk about moral matters and spiritual matters, not just equations, right? Not just lab results. And I think it was Soper and Bagnall who suggested that humanities in general are to emphasize description, explanation, and appreciation of the complexity of human beings who are trying to strive to find out what it means to be us. And I think that's most empowering. Knowledge is empowering. So let me try to prove that perhaps I do belong to this conference today. And so I come to you with what I could call emancipatory discourse of the humanities, with a discipline that we call humanist or humanistic gerontology, with a process that is called Geragogy or Geragogics, and with a humble suggestion that perhaps empowerment can be seen in the act of intergenerational transmission of knowledge. Knowledge being both experience and well, wisdom in general. And this is something that I will try to show you gathered today in the 18th century familial letters, 18th century and 19th century. So I dared to call it the long 18th century, if you don't mind. Now, this is the part that I have to do. Allow me to introduce the words that I just mentioned, which for now mean nothing to you. And I'm doing this also because the discipline that I now added to my research area has been kind of accused of not having proper or typical theory. So the humanist gerontology or humanistic gerontology is part of age studies. But as the name suggests, instead of looking at the entire life cycle, we are actually focusing on the end of life. So we are not necessarily looking at its formative beginnings. We are not necessarily looking at the quality of the middle. We are looking at the very nebulous period that is late life. And as a discipline, humanist gerontology saw its beginnings in the cultural and critical turns within social humanities. You could say it was 1970s, but people actually suggest that it started much earlier in the 19th century. And there is a group of scholars who say, well, Cicero said it all, it might have started in the antiquity as well. So we don't have to argue about the beginnings. In general, this is a new perception on old age. I think it takes a while for the slide to change. I'm not sure. It's not listening to me. No, it is. It's just slow. Okay. As Achenbauer further explains, the first groups of humanist gerontologists were concerned about continuities and alterations, transformations in both the experience and the meaning of old age, while also, as you can see here on the slide, seeking to learn which prescriptions, images, and stereotypes are based on realities manifest in the human conditions. And then in general, humanist gerontology was to, in a more psychological way, produce a fuller and richer account of later years, one that places the subjectivity of older people, the width and the depth of their lives at the forefront of the analysis. And I know this seems obvious nowadays, but it hasn't always been like that. So today we will try to do what humanist gerontology does best, to see people within old age. Okay, or to see people in aging in general. Now, one of the vital steps that humanist gerontology had to make was to first decide and define what old age actually is. We know it's closing bracket, unfortunately, but when does it actually begin? And expectedly, it was discovered that like any term, sociological terms, it is historicized. And it has been noticed that, well, most of the cultures across, let's say, Europe and America decided that the age of 60 will be what we officially call old age. But that worked only in functional terms. It helped governments to decide when you have to be offered, pension, when you can go and retire, whether you can be exempted from certain duties. So that wasn't enough. And indeed, historians of old age decided that if you want to talk about old age, and it doesn't matter which period, you have to subdivide it. You can talk about how many years an individual has lived, and then we call it the calendar. You can talk about functionality, and this is what I explained a second ago. You can also talk about our physiological state, right? How well our bodies are doing. Are our bodies already old or not just yet? And finally, and somewhat cruelly, what others think of our old age and how culture thinks or how old we are according to culture, and how we will be treated because of those stereotypes, because of bias, because of prejudice. And once again, that was a revelation, because it turned out that old age is not just a subjective experience. This is actually a social construct. And as such, we can influence how we talk about it, how we perform it, how we are treated as older individuals. And do notice I'm putting myself in that category. Gerontology's subsequent and revolutionary discovery was that old age does not have to be a form of stagnation, that this is not an abyss, that this is not a limbo, right? This is actual proper stage of life, which has various opportunities for progress that you can develop while you are undergoing what we call late life. And this is when Geragogy was born. It is called, as an alternative name, the pedagogy of aging. And it does teach individuals how to age and essentially how to eventually become old. And we were fine with that when we thought about pedagogy of children, right? We don't mind talking about rites of passage when it comes to middle age. But somehow the discovery that you can teach older individuals and that you can facilitate them on their journey was once again new and a revelation. The man you have on some of those publications, Adam Zich, has actually said something important and somewhat poetically. He called the discipline a lifelong art of growing old. And this is indeed what's important, that it is lifelong, that you start with childhood, that you tell people what old age will be when old age approaches, so that you also are mentally and physically ready. And importantly for today's study, Geragogy suggests that while individuals learn how to find subjective meaning in old age, they can achieve it by offering insight, by offering wisdom to those in need of such knowledge, to the younger generation, so that their own future old age is more successful, perhaps more pleasurable. And thus, I suggest to see empowerment via transmission of wisdom gained through experience as to tripartite or bipartite. It helps older people to find meaning in the process of age-related transformation, or as Edmondson says, reconcile individuals with their own advancing life courses. And we can do it via autobiographic life reviews, restorative nostalgia, integrative remembering, but it also empowers older individuals as mentors and teachers of the future generations. So potential social marginalization or silencing that I think we are all afraid of can actually be counteracted by giving us the power to offer other people intergenerational blueprints on various life stages. But what exactly is this wisdom, or the content of the wisdom that the older generations may provide the younger ones? And am I not just offering it to you another positive stereotype or prejudice, which sees older generations as very disembodied, venerated sages, right? I hope not, and especially not the disembodied part. Edmondson explains that ideas about wisdom have historically tended to center on the capacity to respond to human problems, which cannot be tackled purely in everyday terms. That sounds grand. But the examples of wisdom that I will explore today and offer here on the slide for you only rarely discuss grand truths or moral compasses. The voices you will hear today will offer wisdom on what matters in life and what doesn't. They will tell you how to reap benefits and why you have to start with a very cleverly pre-planned youth to be able to achieve that. But more importantly, for today's focus on empowerment, it will be wisdom on what it means to be old. And I mean what it really means to be old, okay? Voices from the inside of aging. The voices that I will be quoting today will be narrating their experience of aging into old age or old age itself, and they will take us along the journey. And we will take the storytelling or self-telling as truthful and honest, even though you will notice that they are full of contradictions, that they are confused, that there will be retractions, that there will be half-truths, and a life-saving dose of wishful thinking. These voices have checked in practice whether the ideological promises they have heard and inculcated during their youth are actually truth. These are voices that will be unwilling, unable to refuse to talk about aging without mentioning their bodies. These will be voices of those individuals who, through mentorship, try to empower the younger correspondents, but of course us, the future readers as well, and let us see behind the metaphorical curtain, so that our own future aging is more informed and therefore perhaps somewhat more successful, slightly more pleasurable, if that's possible. And importantly, in the conversation about empowerment, these will be voices that by doing all this will not feel alone, and that they will experience their own form of flourishing while doing that. Researchers into old age tell us to avoid meta and mega narratives on old age, suggesting that there are as many stories as there are aging individuals. But there must be a shared common consciousness. There must be the sort of reservoir of images that we all tap into. And I know there is, because I have woken up in sweat many times thinking that I have misattributed a quote or a phrase to an author, thinking, you know, that someone else said it. I have not. But the anxiety and the arrhythmia was exactly because of that, because they all use the same language talking about aging. Perhaps also because this is very embodied language, right? They feel in the same way. So the voices that I'm showing you here will be very conscious of what it means to be, what it means to age in the 18th century and in the 19th century, and they are very much aware of cultural perceptions on old age, and they are very much aware that there is some sort of new generational or intergenerational covenant that they agreed to sign or participate in. And you will notice that they unfortunately internalized a lot of what we could nowadays call ageist convictions. This is mostly because they have been taught, especially in the 18th century, according to Ottaway, quote, that older people should put themselves in the place of younger than them, attempting to fully understand their situation. And this is what I want to begin the presentation, because in the letters that I have examined so far, and of course there are millions to be examined still, there is a very detectable fear of obsolescence and exclusion. And both of those are actually self-inflicted, because my investigated subjects have internalized a lot of ageism, right? They do see themselves with the gaze of the younger generations. They know they are the other. And perhaps this is the saddest part of the presentation today. So before venturing onto their pedagogic endeavor, they will show themselves very much aware of what it means to be old, and very much aware of the fact that they are observed and judged as older generations. Now, Horace Walpole might be the founder of the Gothic novel, but more than the flying helmets and mysterious incestuous mothers, he was afraid of the gaze of the younger generation and the eyes of younger men and women. I mean, sometimes it was more men, sometimes it was more women. And in his letters, he insists, as you see here on the slide, I have had so many years heaped upon me within this month that I have not the conscience to trouble young people when I can no longer be as juvenile as they. Or my mind is such a compound from the vast variety that I have seen, acted, pursued, that it would cost me too much pains to be intelligible to young persons if I had a mind to open myself to them. They certainly don't desire I should. I would not have respectable youth think me an old fool, he says in 1765. I don't find it so uncomfortable to grow old when one is not obliged to expose oneself in public. And this explains why he was so obsessed about building Strawberry Hill House, so that he can hide himself therein. And safely hidden therein, he can admit, quote, I am like animals and love to hide myself when I'm dying. Walpole generally feels that he is causing aesthetic discomfort to the younger men and women, and that the latter will see him as what literature calls senex amans. His acquaintance, Lady Hervey, is equally concerned. And she says, I am too old to make new acquaintances. there requires a certain similarity, both of age and manners, and that cannot be expected for one of my time of day. In short, I confess I am mortified when new acquaintance see me as I am now. I don't mean to my figure, but as to my understanding, which is full as old and as grey as the other. Don't laugh at me for my vanity. This level of self-awareness and self-criticism might explain why in their Geragogic lessons, they first try to establish their position as credible and believable and trustworthy authorities on aging. And they do that stressing the fact of aging. Importantly, because of the internalized ageism or gerontology, they insist that the motivation has nothing to do with the negative stereotypes pertaining to old age. And they always mention garrulity, jealousy, peevishness, pettiness. So they all want to stress that these are not the reasons why they even bother with giving people advice. Mary Wortley Montagu, for instance, wants her daughter to trust her advice, stating, quote, "The truest wisdom is that which diminishes to us what is displeasing and turns our thoughts to the advantages which we possess. I assure you, I give no precepts I do not daily practice." Lord Chesterfield convinces his illegitimate son that his age and experience are his trump cards. I always flatter myself that my experience may be of some use to your youth and inexperience. My advice is just 8 and 30 years older than your own, and consequently, I believe you think rather better. The only sure guide is he who has often gone to the road which you want to go. Let me be that guide, who have gone all roads and who can consequently point out to you the best. A guide, a counselor, a mentor, a minister of the rising ambition, that's a quote from him, and another one, an old stager upon the theatre of the world. These are just a few age-related and age-dependent labels that Chesterfield gives himself. And having played so many roles upon this theatre of life and read so many books, and by books he also means people, he's able to show and explain various trajectories of life to his son, to his godson, and then to his grandchildren. This is possible because Kathleen Woodward suggests youth and age should be seen as intertwined because we all contain, and that's a quote, different age selves. And this coalescence and convergence is exactly what I noticed in my letter writers because they pose themselves as specialists on the age selves and age selves that they have already performed, and literally performed because they suggest it is an act that you have to go through. And they most of the time talk about youth and adulthood, but youth seems to be a bit of a motif there. And so Chesterfield is the one who I think has mastered the anatomy of youth. I thought someone said something. And somewhat obsessively attempts to fashion his son and godson's lives, and looking backward at his own youth, or doing what I earlier called a life review, he teaches him on the importance of time. For God's sake, my boy, do not squander away one moment of your time. Your future fortune, character, and figure in the world entire depend upon your use and abuse of the 2 next years. If you do but employ them well, what may you not reasonably expect to become in time? Or lose no time, I conjure you, in forming your taste, your manners, your mind, your everything. You have but 2 years' time to do it in. For whatever you are to a certain degree at 20, you will be more or less all the rest of your life. May it be a long and happy one. And every step counts. Chesterfield constructs not only a happy and successful youth, but the future content old man. And he says, remember then that whatever knowledge you do not solidly lay the foundation of before you are 18, you will never be master of while you breathe. Knowledge is a comfortable and necessary treat, a shelter for us in an advanced age. And if we do not plant it while young, it will give us no shade when we are old. And in 1751, he says, if you would be a great man in the world when you are old, shine and be showish in it while you are young. Know everybody and endeavor to please everybody. Lessons on proper management of youth likewise entail messages on how to handle failures, on how to handle trouble, on how to handle tragedies that life will inevitably throw at people. So, for example, Mary Wortley Montagu teaches her daughter on the value of grief and pain, both of which she has herself experienced and seen aplenty. She says, everything may turn out to be better than you expect. We see so darkly into futurity, we never know when we have real cause to rejoice or lament. The worst appearances have often happy consequences, as the best lead many times into the greatest misfortunes. What is most in our power, though little so, is the disposition of our own minds. And as seen, the empowerment and a sense of agency of the older generations exactly stems from the fact that they see patterns, they see interdependencies, they see some causal relations and relationships that the younger generations cannot from the standpoint in life. So in other words, the younger generations are not only not able to properly assess certain events, they don't see the point in certain transformations, they don't even, according to my letter writers, understand their own emotions. And they need someone to guide them while also they are learning from their own mistakes. While the lessons on the value of youth necessitate hindsight or nostalgia, the lessons on the letter writers present are a work in progress and an ongoing process of story crafting and storytelling as they find out what old age actually is. The trajectory that I have noticed in the letters usually sees my epistolary writers as someone hoping and believing that their later lives will be amazing, that they will be quiet, that they will be joyful, that they will be fulfilling, a peaceful time spent at home with friends in the space of aging, and let's say a very interesting, though a bit bizarre observation of, psychosomatic processes that are happening, well, to their own bodies. For example, Mary Wortley Montagu writes, I now find that age, when it does not harden the heart and sour the temper, naturally returns to the milky disposition of infancy. Time has the same effect on the mind as on the face. The predominant passion, the strongest feature, become more conspicuous from the others retiring. The various views of life are abandoned from want of ability to preserve them, as the fine complexion is lost in wrinkles. But as surely as a large nose grows larger and a wide mouth wider, the tender child in your nursery will be a tender old woman, though perhaps reason may have constrained the appearance of it, till the mind relaxed is no longer capable of concealing the weakness. For weakness, it is to indulge any attachment at a period of life when we are sure to part with it, or part with life itself at a very short warning. And unfortunately, all of my correspondents need to eventually admit that the visions of senescence of late life they had were based on a supposition that they will be healthy old people, that they will be observing a natural pace of aging, a steady pace, a predictable pace, and very few anticipated that their aging will be accelerated and aggravated by illness and by disability. And this indeed seems to be a very, very repeated scenario. So the message on aging in pain is often belated in terms of delivery. It is not the sons or the godsons that receive the message. It is usually friends and peers. But of course, the letters are then inherited, the letters are published, and that's how they become part of our posthumous geragogic lesson. And thus the most powerful and the somewhat paradoxically empowering lesson on old age is to be physically and mentally and spiritually prepared, because future is a dangerous place. To offer a few examples. Horace Walpole imagined his old age thus in a letter to his best friend. Let us sit down quietly and comfortably and enjoy our coming of old age. What has one to do when one grows tired of the world, as we both do, but to draw nearer and nearer and gently waste the remains of our life with the friends with whom one began it? Young and happy people will have no regard for us and our old stories, and they are in the right. but we shall not tire one another. We shall laugh together when nobody is by to laugh at us. And we may think ourselves young enough when we see nobody younger. But he has been suffering from gout since early middle age. Some suggest that it started when he was 30. And so his old age becomes one of endurance rather than of pleasure. Oh, sorry. The gate of painful age seems open to me, and I must travel through it as I may. Or, what am I but a poor old skeleton tottering towards the grave and conscious of 10,000 weaknesses, follies, and worse? Consider how soon we shall both be nothing. In 1783, years of frequent returns of gout have made a ruin of me. Dullness in the form of indolence grows upon me. I am inactive, lifeless, and so indifferent to most things that I neither inquire after nor remember any topics that might enliven my letters. And then he says to Miss Berry, his crush, can I expect or desire any more at my age? My ambition is to pass the summer. Mary Berry herself agrees decades after Walpole's death, and she says of her own age-related confinement, This is death, not the mere yielding up of breath, which can no longer be of any value. Sarah Churchill, the Duchess of Marlborough, suffering from terrible scurvy and gout, somewhat jokingly predicts, I am sure whatever I do, I can never be well. And at my age, as Sir William Temple says, the play is not worth the candles. Lady Harvey's vision in pain are more bleak. I have not the assurance to assert that I am alive, feeling that above half of my faculties are already dead. I have long been dull, I am now deaf, and my memory is much impaired. At present, I am a little better, though the giddiness is gone off. Age does not recover like youth. And in truth, the little understanding I have is worn very thin indeed. I am a mere rag, and I dare say they have no notion that I ever had any liveliness about me. Lord Chesterfield, who was obsessed with self-control and controlling his health as well, finds his late life good until he personally experiences the fragility of the aging body. He says, I am here in my hermitage very deaf and consequently alone. He says, I consider myself here as an old decayed vessel of long wear and tear, brought into the wet dock to be careened and patched up, not for any long voyage, but only to serve as a coaster for some little time longer. Preventing decay of the body is indeed a bit of a topic or another motif. And Mary Wortley Montagu writes, my time is wholly dedicated to the care of my decaying body and endeavoring, as the old song says, to grow wiser and better as my strength wears away. And we do indeed see the change in language when they talk about their own bodies. Letters, all of them are full of words like skeleton, carcass, flesh, sometimes rotting flesh. They compare themselves to vegetables. They compare themselves to worms. Everything is literally dragging them down. So I'm sorry to say that it sounds so pitiful and literally painful, and that it's so difficult to say anything positive about old age, especially aging with illness. But what I can say and should say is that my research subjects are very much aware of it. So they never blame old age on how bad they feel. They blame the illness. They blame the disease, right? So they know that age is only a factor that slows rehabilitation down, that they don't get better as soon as they did or as early as they did back in the days because of age, but age itself is not the issue. So the self-awareness of what prevents a successful and happy experience of aging is actually a lesson in itself. Importantly, aging with illness facilitates the development of a new understanding of death. And however morbid that sounds, it's a new appreciation of death. Most of my authors naturalize and demystify death, teaching that one actually learns that it has a positive function, that dreams of immortality are foolish, that they are unnatural. They actually quote Gulliver's Travels and the Isle of the Immortals to suggest how ridiculous it is to want to be immortal. So death in the letters is a wished for conclusion, and it always comes at the right moment. Mary Wortley Montagu soothes her daughter, saying, according to the old English proverb, young people may die, but old must. You see, I am very industrious in finding comfort to myself in my exit and to guard as long as I can against the peevishness which makes age miserable in itself and contemptible to others. So you can see that gratitude, stoicism, and cheerfulness, the third one actually being prescribed to the elderly in the 18th century, are part and parcel of the discourse of aging. And well, perhaps this is why I will dare to claim that despite the gloomy descriptions of suffering, my subjects still claim it's worth it. Okay? Grass for them is never greener on the other side. They really appreciate that what they experience is just that it's not worse, and it can always be worse, they think. They do get some sense of rejuvenation when observing how the younger generations taste life for the first time, right? And to give you some examples, Sarah Churchill, Duchess of Marlborough, insists, I am just as I was with all my complaints. I have no more use of my limbs than a child bound up in swaddling clothes, but I still have spirits. Mary Wortley Montagu writes to her daughter, there is a quiet after abandoning of pursuits, something like the rest that follows a laborious day. I tell you this for your comfort. It was formerly terrifying view to me that I should one day be an old woman. I now find that nature has provided pleasures for every state. Those are only unhappy who will not be contented with what she gives and strive to break through her laws. Mary Berry, remember the crush of Horace Walpole, is also grateful for how fate treats her. And she writes to Frances Parker of the Duchess of Morley. At my own fireside, I can still hear and see, for which I assure you I am duly grateful. For myself taken singly, my age makes me feel a sort of independent indifference. And there is humor too. And if you allow me, I'll read it from a book because I only just found it today, from a man who I'm not sure you ever heard of, Sidney Smith. He's a canon and he's got a great sense of humor. So he says, for instance, my breathlessness and giddiness are gone, chased away by the gout. If you hear of 16 or 18 pounds of human flesh, they belong to me. I look as if a curate had been taken out of me. I am delighted to hear such improved accounts of my fellow sufferer at Castle Howard. Lady Holland is severe in her medical questions, but I detail the most horrible symptoms at which she takes flight. Sounds funny. Comparing himself to others, Chesterfield says, natural good spirits, some philosophy, and long experience of the world make me much less dejected and melancholy than most people in my situation would be, or that I should have been myself some years ago. I comfort myself with the reflection that I did not lose the power till after I had near lost the desire of hearing. When I consider how much of my life is past and how little of it, according to the course of nature, remains, I can almost persuade myself that I am no loser at all. By all this, you see that I am neither a dejected nor a sour deaf man. Horace Walpole is empathetic enough to admit and notice that he's got certain class privileges and he enjoys old age. He says, I have had a much happier life than I deserve and than millions that deserve better. I should be very weak if I could not bear the uncomfortable of old age, when I can afford what comforts it is capable of. How many poor old people have none of them? I am ashamed whenever I am peevish and recollect that I have fire and servants to help me. And I will leave the final words to him indeed. In one of his letters to Lady Hervey, on a good day, I should say, he poetically observes, I am going downhill, but the sun sets pleasingly. To conclude, I promise I am concluding. Thomas Cole, one of the precursors of humanist gerontology, states, aging, like illness and death, reveals the most fundamental conflict of the human condition, the tension between infinite ambitions, dreams, and desires on the one hand, and vulnerable, limited, decaying physical existence on the other. And the epistolary lessons quoted today exemplify and prove Cole correct. But rather than a sad existential truth, the men and women of letters that I presented to you make this realization empowering. Forewarned is forearmed. Telling the truth about old age and the process of aging facilitates the younger generations on their personal voyages of life. The future old are given a chance to be more aware, more prepared, and less disappointed with what awaits. The age mentors offer wisdom that is tested and not theoretical or ideological. The empowerment that my age subjects seem to experience is what centuries later Proust will call perfect knowledge. And to quote, it's a knowledge of the past recaptured, of indeed youth, connecting one's past with one's present. More contemporarily, Ronald Carson, another gerontologist, expressed this by calling old age a time for recapitulating, connecting part to part, remembering. The Geragogy projects that I presented today prove that people wanted to make aging more meaningful and more conscious, both for others and for themselves. And I think there is very little, or there is nothing more empowering that we can say about late life, which more and more, especially today, can be defined as, I'm quoting again, a nebulous existence of unpredictable duration. Thank you.